Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells,
We're
Christopher Wells.
we're here with you guys, live post West playing, and it's been a wild night, I think, to say the least. I see a couple of people in chat, hello there, Xander Cade. It's been a while. Um
Sir.
but yeah, holy, what an eventful night. I really want to start, I guess, with the Lakers game. Because yeah, I think that was the most eventful. We'll talk about the Sacramento one, I guess, in a little bit. But holy cow! I mean, we kind of called it. I guess we thought that the Lakers would win this game. In different ways. I thought that it would be a blowout. You thought that it would be more of a close, competitive game. But yeah, I think we should start with them for sure. So, you being the Laker fan, I think you should really kick it off and give us, your thoughts on the whole experience and where do they go from here?
Yeah, so, obviously, if you watch the game, the Lakers won 110-106. Kind of a, like you said, easily the most eventful game, the craziest game, right? Because, obviously in the first quarter, right, you knew that the Pelicans were going to swing back and punch right after we saw
Mm-hmm.
how awful they played in that previous game. So you knew it was coming. The question was how the Lakers were going to respond, right? So they went into the end of the first quarter down, 8-9 or whatever. Um, Then in the second quarter, right, that second unit for the Lakers came in, built up a run, right? Gabe Vincent, who had pretty much been, kind of a ghost, right, for most of the year, really didn't do much and wasn't really available, comes alive, hits a couple of threes. They get some stops, they get out and run, and they build up a double digit lead, right? And then they make a couple of blunders at the end of the first half where they're up 14, and then the Pelicans cut it down to 10. So you knew, right, you were in for kind of a crazy game. Then the third quarter, right, goes around and the Lakers at one point go up like 18 points.
Yeah.
Um, and it looked like it was starting to be, kind of a replication of the previous game, except you weren't getting quite as dominant of a game from LeBron and AD. And then the Pelicans, right, were not going to be denied. You give them a lot of credit for showing a ton of fight, especially Zion, who had 40 points. And they cut it pretty much to a two possession game at the end of the third. And then pretty much we were in a barn burner fight for the entire fourth, where
Yeah.
it got to a point where it was a tie game. We had no idea who was going to win, right? Zion unfortunately goes out right in the last few minutes of the game. According to Shams, shortly before we recorded, he's got a hamstring injury. We'll see if he plays in that next game. But it was just, again, it was just kind of goes to show, just the fact that the importance of the plane, right? Because obviously there had been a lot of discussions going around about, should they tank this game? Should they throw it away? So that way they can play the OKC Thunder in the first round as opposed to the Nuggets. But this is why you don't do that, right? Because it's a do or die game. I mean, obviously, if you lose, you have one more play-in game. But as we saw in that second game, and we'll get into that, right? Anything can happen, right? We literally saw Zion gets hurt, right? Towards the end of a game, in a game where he was the best player on the floor,
Yeah.
right, by a pretty significant margin, because you really didn't get a great game from LeBron or AD. I think AD was okay, mainly in the second half, right? But LeBron, who was good in the first half, just had a horrible fourth quarter.
Yeah.
He looked like I think he ran out of gas. Where
For
like
sure.
for most of the game, he was guarding Zion, and unlike in the first game, Zion was, he was cooking.
Yeah, and
So I
Braun took
mean,
some huge shots. He was putting his body on the line. I'll give him that. The effort was there, but you have limitations.
right. But that's why, you have the guards, right? Because obviously, like, D'Lo and Austin, right? D'Lo got it going in the first quarter. We had that weird, I guess, confrontation between him
Yeah.
and Jose Alvarado, where it was a double tech, which was very
I
unexpected.
thought that was
You know,
more BS in my opinion. I thought that it should have been all Alvarado because I mean he was pretty much the antagonist in the situation. But it
yeah,
is what it is.
right. But and then from that point on, right, then things were kind of going the Lakers' way. But um, either way, right? I mean, again, you have to win any way you can. And, my thought process was always going to be that it was going to be a closer game because of the fact that it's very difficult to blow out a team, twice, right, in a very short amount of time. You're talking about basically a playoff type game, right? And you're on the
Hmm.
road against a really hostile crowd, right? We know how the Pelicans fans feel about AD. So, I mean, again, the big thing is you just get the win and you rest up, and then you have to play the Nuggets, right? Obviously, they're not going to be favored, not going to have a great shot, but I mean, again, it's better than going home, or at the very least, it's better than losing this game, and then you have to play the winner of 9-10. You would be at home, but you just never know, right? So
Yeah.
that's why you can't waste opportunities. So it was good that, they ended up making a couple of big plays down the stretch, right? Like even a D'Angelo Russell, where you never know what you're going to expect from him in a big game, but he has been good this season and he has helped them out in a lot of pressure packed moments, right? Where, yeah, it's a wide open three, but we've seen many times, right? We saw in the conference finals, he had some wide open shots that just didn't fall. Obviously, this is not quite as pressure packed of an environment,
Yeah.
but,
Pelicans
again,
gambled on that, like no rotation. That was
right.
intriguing to me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was a play where they took Jose Alvarado out,
Hmm.
right? He
Put in
had a
Dyson
stretch.
Daniels for the size.
Right, yeah, and I don't know, like
He
Willie
didn't
Green,
rotate.
they made some adjustments. They did some things that I think you expected. You expected them to have Zion in some other positions other than just running into a brick wall over and over again, right?
Yeah.
You expected, more ball pressure. Just well, you expected a better game from Valanciunas, and he was better than before, but he couldn't have been much worse. So I mean, but
Yeah,
either
true.
way, um, I think the biggest thing is that yeah, you get a big win and then you punch your ticket to the playoffs. From the Lakers perspective. And then from the Pelicans perspective, again, like it's rough because you competed. You could have won that game. You might have actually won that game if Zion hadn't have gotten hurt.
Yeah, agreed.
But instead, the worst possible thing happens where he gets hurt right at the end of a crucial moment in the game. And he's not there. He was their best player by far, right? They took Ingram out of the game because he was awful, right?
McCollum too.
Rui defensively pretty much, locked him up where he couldn't really get anywhere. He used his strength and his size and his physicality. And McCollum, like you said, was shut down, right? Austin Reeves did a good job. Gabe Vincent did a good job limiting him as well. So I think this is an example of the Lakers offensively that's been their calling card for the last couple of months. But in this game, it was kind of their defense, for the most part, especially in that. And in the first game, it was their defense that kind of led the way. And that's kind of the thing where it's like, you had a bad LeBron and AD game, by their standards, and you still ended up winning. You got just enough from other guys to be able to pull out that win. But, for the Pelicans, it sucks because we don't know if Zion's going to play in that next game. And if he doesn't play, right, that you're going to have a tough time. Not that they couldn't beat the Kings because they've beaten the Kings, what, 5 times this year. But Zion is kind of the biggest reason why they've been able to beat the Kings because they don't have an answer for him. So that's rough if you're the Pelicans, where it's like you could have won this game. You got smashed in that last regular season game, so you went into the play-in, and you could go from being the 6th seed to now you could be out of the playoffs if you lose that next game. So that's why you never take a play-in game for granted. So I'm glad that the Lakers, as a Laker fan, took that game seriously. Obviously, it didn't look like that in the fourth, but for the most part, they played like they wanted to win that game. I think. Like when I watched that game, it didn't feel like they were playing in a way where it's like, if we lose, it's okay. Like, no, you need to win this game so you can get the rest before you go play the Nuggets, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, and I think like the thing is, I think what they're banking on with the Nuggets matchup is like if they somehow do get past them, it'll probably be a cakewalk for them beyond the Nuggets. It'll be a lot easier. I think the pathway for them to get to the finals would be a lot easier if they do really face the Nuggets in the first round versus facing them later on. So I think that's kind of like what they're thinking about.
Yeah, we got a comment. Xander Cade, Lakers winning is the biggest L this year. LOL. That's funny. That's a good one.
I guess, is he trying to say like that they're going to take the L to Denver anyways? Or I can't remember. Is Xander Cade, is he an OKC
I think he
fan?
was saying, no, he's the Clipper fan. I
Clipper,
think he was
okay.
just saying like, I think he was just like saying that they should have lost. But
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's valid, I guess. I did see like some people talking about that. We even posed the question in the last episode. But yeah, I thought March Madness was over, but this really felt like, a college game where, the tide kind of shifted, momentum shifted back and forth. There were a lot of exhilarating plays. Like you said, that fourth quarter was wild. Like I really thought that the Lakers were really about to sell that game. They had no answer for Zion pretty much. And, Zion got hurt and he self-subbed out. And then that was kind of, the end of it for the Pelicans. Although, they did kind of stay down to the last minute, a lot of plays, a lot of clutch plays, but, Lakers came out there and did their thing.
Yeah, I think you got to give a lot of credit to the Pelicans for the effort because, again, people had been talking about, well, should the Lakers tank this game on purpose? I mean, the Pelicans could have said the same thing. I don't think they'd have a great chance of beating the Nuggets either necessarily. So, but I think, you got to give them credit for, after the way they got smashed in that previous game,
Yeah.
they responded in a big way. And again, you could tell both teams wanted to win this game. And for New Orleans, it's just unfortunate that you had an injury to what was their, the guy who was basically the best player on the floor. And
Yeah,
shout out to Zion as well,
for
right? Just
sure.
because again, the fact that he was so awful in that previous game, you were just kind of almost hoping, that he would have a better game. Because I know he's a guy that kind of gets, clowned a lot at times just because of, a lot of different factors. But hopefully he's okay enough to play in that next playing game, because it really would stink if, the Pelicans potential playoff run, you win almost 50 games, you lose one playing game and then you lose another one. Um, that would just be rough.
Yeah, and I feel
Zion
like,
is him.
oh yeah,
This
yeah.
indicates that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
he is, bro. Like we have to give him his flowers. I know it's like one game, but I think this might have been his first postseason action, right?
Yeah,
So like for
yeah,
him to come
basically.
out and show out like that, it's crazy. So hopefully, if he is healthy, going into the next game potentially,
Right.
he can do it
I
again.
mean, yeah, that game is pretty much why so many people were so high on him coming out of college, because of the fact that he's so athletic, so strong and physical and quick, and
Yeah,
the fact that you have a tough chance of staying in front of him, and sometimes you can put a big physical guy on him and it doesn't matter, right?
for
Like I
sure.
mean, AD and LeBron were trying, to slow him down and they couldn't. And there was a stretch where at certain points they were just like, we're just gonna have to let this go.
Yeah,
Because like you said, LeBron took some charges, earlier in the game, and he hurt his hand. And again, stuff like that. That's why you can't risk losing a game. But yeah, I mean, I think he was on both of our All NBA teams. I mean, we
absolutely.
had him, I think, All NBA third, because of the way that he finished, the season in the last few months, right? Because
Yeah,
his improved play is why the Pelicans ended up winning so many more games than earlier in the season when they looked like they were just kind of lost, right?
yeah,
Where you didn't know whether or not, hey, is Ingram the best player on the team? It hasn't really been Zion, but again, in this latter part of the season, that previous last regular season game notwithstanding, he's been great.
yeah.
But
The Pelicans, they got unlucky. I think, especially considering the injury, and now they're gonna have to take that to play against the Kings, which is going to be, I think, a tough matchup for them if Zion isn't there. Because you're going to have to expect, I think, a lot more from Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum, because they both played horrible. There's no skating around that fact or anything like that. Thought Trey Murphy had a good game. But I think the Pelicans, they do need to make some adjustments. I didn't like a lot of the things that I did see, but I think there is a lot of potential upside as well, because I think we all know that their defense is something that kind of carries a lot of weight. And if they can play behind Zion's offensive firepower, I think this team can be legit. It's just like they've been so unlucky with injuries over the past few years. It's kind of the same tale as last year where, we're looking at them. Now they might be without Zion again. And it's like, oh, great.
And that's the rough part, because again, Ingram was playing well,
Hmm.
Zion was playing well,
Hmm.
then Ingram gets hurt, finally comes back, but is still kind of not quite right. And then Zion gets hurt. So it's like right as Ingram comes back, and maybe he starts kind of finding his rhythm, then Zion's out. Again, we
Yeah.
have no idea if he's going to play, because again, hamstrings are tricky where, you could, make one false move and then all of a sudden you're out. And that's kind of the tough part. It's like an ankle. So,
Yeah. Before we move on, I guess, did we have anything more to say about either of these teams, positive or negative?
yeah, I mean, again, I think, from the Pelicans' perspective, I think there's a lot of players to like on the team. It's just, I think the tough part is it does kind of feel like Ingram and Zion are just kind of a weird fit together, because it's like they both need the ball. Neither of them are like, snipers from three, right? Ingram can hit threes, but he's much more comfortable, right? Inside the 3-point line.
Right.
Zion doesn't really take jump shots at all. Every time you see him take one, it's, kind of gross. But
I mean,
either way.
they give it to him. Like, he they're going to sack.
Right, but so that's kind of the rough part, and you don't really have anybody else that kind of organizes other stuff, right? Like McCollum's more of like a scorer, which is fine. And then the other guys are more like 3-and-D players. So I like a lot of the players on the team. I
Hmm.
just don't necessarily know if the two stars fit together. And then it's like neither of them are great defenders, either. So that also doesn't really help. So it almost kind of you almost kind of wonder like how long are you gonna just keep letting them play together? But it just sucks because again they've won almost 50 games, so it's clear that this is a good team. It's just your two stars have been have missed so much time the last few seasons, right? Like this was the first season where both of them were relatively healthy. But then lo and behold, in the biggest game of the season, one of them who just came back lays an egg because he's just not 100%, and then the other guy gets hurt, in the most crucial point of the game.
Yeah.
So
It's not over
I
yet,
think
though. Their season's not done. They still have a chance.
right. So yeah, and we'll get into. I guess we can get into the 9-10 unless you want to kind of just talk about the Lakers potential Nuggets matchup.
Yeah,
I
let's
guess.
let's talk about the Lakers Nuggets because I think that's the hot topic at the moment. I think people care about that a little bit more than the potential Kings Pelicans matchup. It's going to be wild.
Xander Cade says Pelicans have potential to be great. To be honest, I think there's definitely potential for them to be better for sure. It's just again they got to be healthy, and I feel like you're gonna have to probably decide like do you still want McCollum, there as your lead guard, or do you kind of want to switch him for somebody else,
Right.
Because I think at the deadline, there were talks about them being interested in DeJounte Murray, which would also be kind of a strange fit, because he needs the ball too. So it's just like, you almost wonder, like, I don't know if you might have to split Zion and Ingram up. I'm not saying you should. I'm just like wondering, like, if it just seems so clunky at times. But at the same time, they won almost 50 games. But some of that was because there were a couple of stretches where like one was out and then the other was there, and the team was kind of just built around specifically just them, right? Like when we saw Ingram out, we saw Zion basically with a bunch of 3-and-D guys, and then Ingram, when Zion was out, he's pretty much initiating most of the offense, and then kind of scoring from the perimeter, like the mid-range area, or driving and kicking. So
yeah, like I think they need more of like I'm not going to say like a floor general, but somebody who can really control the pace and distribute the ball at an elite level. Like maybe somebody like Tyus Jones. I would say like a point guard that can facilitate, because I just don't think having like a three-headed scoring monster is the greatest, especially when all three of these guys can have some potential health issues. But I guess back to like the Lakers Nuggets matchup. I'm intrigued. Off rip, who do we think is going to win it? I'd probably say the Nuggets.
yes.
But there is a pathway for the Lakers to do it. I heard things about like LeBron and Anthony Davis having a conversation or whatever. I don't know what that means and how that's going to translate. But systematically, I think the way that it's going to go is, the Nuggets, they're going to play bully ball. Same thing as last year. Jokic is going to dominate. Is Anthony Davis going to answer? That's going to be the main question for me, I think. And how will LeBron respond to the size of the Denver Nuggets? Because he's going to have to go up against Gordon. MPJ, not a great defender, but has a lot of size and length that could bother you. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. How is LeBron going to respond to the size? Will Anthony Davis get punked again? Who knows?
Yeah, I think, the benefit, I think, compared to last year is that I think, LeBron seems like he's physically just healthier than he was in the playoffs last year. Because if we remember in the playoffs last year, right, before they got there, he had the foot injury. So for most of, the second part of the season, he wasn't really the same guy that he was earlier in the year, right? Like if you look last year, he shot 32% from three in the regular season. And that was because there were a few games at the end where he shot really, really, a very high percentage. Xander Cade says sweep. I don't know. Like, I think the Nuggets are going to win.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a potential for the Lakers to do a little bit better because I think you're going to have a better version of LeBron and AD. Because, again, I think last year in the playoffs, he shot 26% from three.
Yeah.
Like, he was, he couldn't really hit any jump shots at all, aside from, I think, a couple of Warriors games. I mean, he just didn't really, he couldn't hit any jumpers.
Right.
Whereas this year, he's shooting 41%. And the shot looks different, right? It's a lot quicker. Right. The shot selection, I don't think is quite as bad. Like it was bad in this game, but like, I don't think this game is necessarily indicative of how he's played for most of the year.
Sure.
But I think again, the tough part if you're the Lakers is just, again, like you said, it's not even just about Jokic, but like Jamal Murray, if you look back at that series, he averaged 32 points a game.
Absolutely.
Like, I think there was a case to be made that he could have been the guy that could have won the Western Conference Finals, MVP award or whatever. Because I mean, like every time, like the Lakers were kind of getting back into the game, usually he would kind of end up shutting it down. I mean, just in general as a whole, like if you look at some of the shooting percentages in that series compared to like even in the finals against the Heat, the Nuggets didn't shoot quite as well from the field. But then you also look at the guard defenders, right? Like you have D'Lo and Austin in the backcourt, compared to like Jimmy Butler and Gabe Vincent trying to defend.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of a big difference there. But again, like outside of LeBron and AD, because obviously that is the most important thing. Because if those two guys are healthier, in order for you to win, you're going to need both of them to be two of the three best players. It can't be like Jokic 1, Jamal Murray probably 2, and then one of LeBron or AD 3 or 4. Like
Mm-hmm.
if that happens, that's how you get a sweep.
Yeah.
Like Xander Cade says. But if you get, Jokic probably still 1, but then maybe like LeBron and AD are 2 and 3, and it's like kind of close, like not just like completely just one sided. That's how you might have a shot. And then obviously you need D'Angelo Russell to average more than 6 points a game.
True.
'Cause
And for him
that's
not to get punked. Like he's
right.
another
And
defensive liability.
right. And once they get into the playoffs, he's going to be targeted defensively. And the Nuggets, you have Jamal Murray, right? So I mean, that's in that starting five. It's going to have to be Austin Reeves that's going to have to guard him, and he's done a much better job, I think, defensively recently than earlier in the season.
Yeah.
But again, Jamal Murray, that's a tough guy to guard because he's he's a good athlete, got size, and he's got physicality too, and that's kind of a tough player for the Lakers to really stay in front of. And again, if he goes off with Jokic, that's how you get a scenario where that's how they usually win. Because again, like if you look in the finals, he averaged 21 a game, but he did average 10 assists, so he had a better floor game, but he didn't go off scoring wise, quite
Yeah.
as well as he did against the Lakers, right? Like that was probably his best performance in the postseason, right? That Lakers series. So I think
Yep.
that's kind of how you have to look at it. Gabe Vincent, maybe he could do something defensively, but he's going to have to hit some jumpers, right? He can't be, like a 0 level scorer.
Yeah.
Does Vanderbilt come back? Probably not. But I just think it's a tall task, anyways, because it's just like we know that the Nuggets have structural advantages. That just makes it really tough for the Lakers because, a lot of times for the Lakers, what they can do is use their size and physicality to overwhelm another team.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't really work against the Nuggets because, like you said, you have Aaron Gordon. Even though Jokic is not like, a top tier defender, he's a big guy. He takes up a lot of space
Yeah.
and he's a smart defender, right? He knows how to kind of use, play angles defensively, put his arms up and just make it tough for somebody, right? Like
Yep.
you're not always just going to be able to score over him. So I think that's kind of the big thing is like, you're going to obviously need help from the other guys, Rui, D'Lo, Austin, and other role players. And then in the fourth, that's probably where you're going to have LeBron and AD probably close the game out for you.
Yeah.
Your best bet, I think, is you need to win one of these first 2 games, preferably game 1. But you have to win one of the first 2.
Yeah, you got to
'Cause you're
set the
gonna have
tone.
to win. Yeah, because you're gonna have to win in Denver anyways, because you don't have home court.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
but
It's
again,
gonna be wild,
you'd
bro.
still rather be in the 7th seed, even if you have to play the Nuggets in the first round, than lose a play-in game on purpose, and then possibly be in the situation that the next team we're going to talk about is currently in right now.
Oh boy.
So, yeah, so I guess we should probably move on to this
Yeah.
second play-in game,
Let's
which
talk
I
about
think
'em.
was a little bit more of a snooze fest, outside of the late in the second and early in the third. And this one I think was the much more shocking result, right? Because I think
Absolutely.
we both going into this one, we both expected Golden State to win. And I don't remember whether or not we said they would win handily, but I think we both felt pretty comfortable in saying that Golden State was going to win this game because we talked about the difficulties that Sacramento was going to have without Malik Monk to be able to score. But they won 118-94 at home in Sacramento. The crowd went nuts. Who needs Malik Monk, I guess, if you have Keegan Murray, who had 32 points. And then Keon Ellis chipped in with 15, played great defense. De'Aaron Fox, 24. Harrison Barnes with 17. Domantas Sabonis, kind of getting revenge on Golden State, right? With a solid game, 16 and 12 with 7 assists, right? He wasn't bad, right? Really, this was a game where it was really the starters. I know, I think it was Trey Lyles hit a couple of shots, but, because you don't have Malik Monk, if you were going to win, this would have been the formula to win this game, is that you needed all of your starters. Yeah, the Kings cooked tonight, Xander Cade. Yes, you're right.
Facts, bro.
You pretty much needed all 5 of your starters, pretty much everybody in the rotation to play really well.
And a lot of minutes.
And a lot of minutes, right? Which we knew was going to happen because, again, all of the starters except for Harrison Barnes played at least 37 minutes, basically, right?
Right.
Barnes played at least at 34, which is still a lot for him. But, again, you didn't get much help from the bench, but you got just enough. And the Kings, the funny thing is obviously last season, right? They were number 1 offensively, but they were not a very good defensive team,
Mm-hmm.
right? But this season, as of late, right, they've been winning a lot more games with their defense, and a lot of that is because of Keon Ellis in that starting five, right? Who has replaced Kevin Herter. And we talked about when Herter first got hurt. Um, we talked about the fact that we didn't think that that loss was quite as significant
Yeah.
because of the fact that he wasn't having a great season anyways. Like it was
Mhm.
another guy to have in the rotation, but Keon Ellis, he stepped into that role and played really well right out of the gates because his shooting was good, right, since he's been starting, and he's been playing much better defense. He had 3 steals and 3 blocks.
Yeah.
And he spent most of his time, him and Keegan Murray were kind of taking turns guarding Steph. And that was really the formula for this game where, that was the shocking part where like with Golden State, I mean, they just couldn't do anything on offense for the most part. I mean, it was kind of we talked about, earlier in the season a lot of the Warriors struggles on the offensive end where it's a lot of nights where it's like Steph has to do a lot and nobody else really contributes at that high of a level. But the Kings, I mean, the defense they played in this game was just I really didn't expect it at all. And then obviously the other factor was the shot making as well. Because that's the part that I think, again, Keegan Murray going 8 of 13 from 3. The commentators mentioned how like almost every contested 3 was the one that went in, but all the wide open ones for the most part missed. I mean, he was even, driving to the basket and kind of finishing through contact, getting to the line. Um I mean, again, if Keegan Murray is the leading scorer, for both teams, right? I mean, that's pretty much how you're going to win the game because that pretty
Facts.
much means nobody on Golden State really had, a lot of them kind of had the worst versions of themselves in terms of their games. But a lot of credit to the Kings because again, nobody, ourselves included, expected them to win this game. Even though they were at home, where they've been, way better all year than on the road. And I'm sure a lot of Warriors fans, right, probably thought they were going to win this game because, they thought that they were the better team. But that's the tough part about the play-in is that it's one game, anything can happen. And if, the other team just hits everything, I mean, they hit what? They shot 18 of 39 from three. That'll get it done, right? 46 from three. And the offensive rebounds, which is something that Golden State normally is much better at than Sacramento. Um, Golden State has been the best rebounding team in the NBA this year, and in this game, there were a lot of costly possessions where they would get the stop but give up the offensive rebound, which normally is what happens to the other team who's playing the Warriors. Not to mention also the turnovers, right? It really was kind of like a game that was a lot more like a lot of their games earlier in the season where they were really struggling. And it was like, Steph kind of doing, what he can and then, Clay not really doing much of anything, right? Like in this game, he had a goose egg.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Bat zero, bro.
yeah, to quote my dad, he had a goose egg, 0 points, 0 for 10, 0 for 6 in the most important game of the season. That just cannot happen. Trace Jackson Davis started pretty much absolutely awful. And it was kind of interesting, right? Because it was Looney last year in the playoffs that was the guy that limited Sabonis, but he wasn't really effective at all either. He's not really been great this season.
Yeah.
Right, Chris Paul really didn't do much of anything. Some of the young guys, I think, like Pajemski and Kaminga, played well, right? I guess Pods, his issue was he was good on the boards, hit a couple of shots, but his defense was awful. I'm sorry, Kendrick Perkins, but I don't think he belongs on the all defensive second team.
Yeah.
Just my personal opinion. But either way, um, but I think in this one, really, it was the vets that kind of let you down. I mean, you look around, Draymond was okay, I guess, right? I mean, he was the leading shot taker, I think, in the first quarter or first half, which is never really a great sign. He, hit his shots, which is nice, but you'd rather him shooting than Steph. Um, Wiggins was bad, right? 4 for 11. This was more like the Wiggins from earlier in the year. Clay we already talked about was absolutely awful. Kaminga had a stretch in the second quarter, right? Where he kind of got it back in because in the first quarter he was really just out of control, a lot of wild shots,
Yeah.
kind of what you expect. They left him open from three, didn't hit any of them. He had like I said, he had the brief stretch, and then, again, he played hard, but and then even Steph, right? He had 22, 8 for 16, 3 of 7 from the field, but he also had 6 turnovers. And I think that's kind of been another problem this season is that I think his individual season has not been quite as good as last year's. And it's not all his fault, right? Because obviously the team is also just not as good. When you have Clay playing the way he played, and he had been playing better as of late, but he picked a bad night to not have a good game. And then Wiggins kind of not being as good. Looney not being as good, it just kind of forces Steph into a position where, because the commentators talked about it, where they're like, they're not running a lot of off the ball stuff, but that's because, like, you know, off ball for other than Steph, who else? Nobody could really do anything. So, I
Right.
mean, you kind of had to put the ball in Steph's hands, let him play on the ball, but then you get a bad version of him where he's turning the ball over. And the transition defense, it's pretty much an automatic basket.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the rough part. Xander Cate says trade Clay. He's a free agent, so he can't really be traded unless it's a sign and trade.
Yeah.
I
That's not going to
guess
happen.
right, but I don't know. Like, I really didn't expect that at all. I mean, I know that obviously a lot of times when you have, these dynastic teams that go on these long runs, it tends to end badly.
Hmm.
But I didn't really expect them to just get blown out by the Kings. I mean, again, it was other than the second quarter, like it looked like they were going to lose like pretty early on to me. Like I know that like maybe you thought, okay, maybe the Kings will stop hitting shots, but it just kind of looked like they internally just felt like, yeah, we don't have it in this game. And that was kind of shocking to me where, you know, nobody was really that great for that team. And obviously Clay was the worst of them. I guess I'll let you kind of take it from here, but that was
Yeah.
kind of a disappointment, I think.
For sure. And like I expected this more so, I guess, in the playoffs, at least, later in the playoffs, not in the play in, that,
Yeah.
that I thought that they didn't really stand a chance if they got out of the play in, but for them to go out sad like this, it was really bad. They pretty much got out coached, outplayed on all fronts. They were got blitzed by the Kings pretty much. I mean, by they, it was really only Steph that got blitzed. That's why he turned the ball over so much. But, when you're getting blitzed like that, somebody's got to be open and somebody's got to hit the shots. That's where Klay Thompson comes into play. And for him to go 0 for 10, 0 for 6 from 3, it's crazy, bro. And, like I personally thought like he was done. But it was bad. Like, I was actually in disbelief that he actually put up 0 points in pretty much their most important game of the season. I'm not going to harp on him too long because I don't want to kind of like add fuel to the fire, but it's kind of wild how we were praising him like a week ago, talking about how well he had played, like how quietly he was like turning the season around, and then he comes out and does this. Good night, Warriors. Facts.
Yeah. Keith Wells says good night, Warriors. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what it was. They kind of just went out with a whimper. I mean, they went out sad. I mean, that's kind of the rough part because again, like this was kind of the problem for a lot of the season where it's just like, who outside of Steph can you really trust offensively? And tonight it was basically nobody. And if nobody else really shows up, unless Steph has a Herculean game, it's not going to happen. Like that's the tough part ultimately because he doesn't have, like another co-star, to kind of lean on. It was supposed to be, some of the other guys, but it seems like they've all just kind of taken a step back at the worst possible time. And I just kind of wonder, where do you really go from here? Because, this is one of the most expensive rosters in the NBA, and you didn't even make the playoffs.
Yep.
I mean, I don't necessarily think the calculus changes even if they had gotten in, right? Because, like you said, I just didn't necessarily have a lot of belief that they could make a deep run. And in a way, this was supposed to be the better roadmap for them because it's like you're playing the Kings in the play-in as opposed to the Lakers. And then if you get in, you're 8 and you get to play OKC. You don't have to play the right. And sometimes things don't work out, right? You got to get lucky. And then you also factor in, right? Like, they're vets, right? You look at Draymond and the position he kind of put the team in where earlier in the season we were talking about it, right? Where he was just kind of beating people up for no real reason.
No reason,
and
bro.
then it's tossed, for multiple games. And a lot of those games were games that they might have won. And then it's like maybe you're not even in the play-in as the 10 seed, in a do or die game where one bad night and your year's over.
Yeah, and
right?
I think
Like,
that's where like Steph's like frustration in like the past couple weeks kind of showed, where he was like, now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, and then like, all of the crunch time games that we talked about where it's like every game for them half the time was a close game and you just had no idea whether or not they were going to win it. I mean, there was like a Warrior fan I think I saw on X, right, that kind of had like a video compilation, kind of reminded me of like last year's Lakers earlier in the year where they had like so many games that went right down to the wire where something crazy happens and you just find a way to lose at the end, right? Like the Jokic 3-game winner, right? The Chet Holmgren game tying fadeaway 3 in the corner.
Right.
Where they go into OT, Chet Holmgren getting fouled on a three in another game. I mean, the Malik Monk banked in game winner. I mean, like just like a whole compilation of like just a lot of just crazy games that didn't go their way. And now you do kind of wonder like what happens, right? Clay's a free agent. I mean, I still believe that they'll probably bring him back. I don't think he's going to get as much money. I know there's rumors about Orlando, being interested in picking him up, but I mean, if you're Orlando, I mean, how much money are you going to be willing to give him? How much does he really change the course of your team? He's an older
Yeah.
guy. I mean, obviously he can still shoot. It was a bad game, but he can still shoot. He's got some size, so technically he's kind of like a helpful player. But I don't know, is he worth $20+ million a year? Like, I don't think so.
No. And it's like,
According to Xander, yeah, go on.
no.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, read it.
according to Xander Cade, we are witnessing the downfall of the Warriors, and I'm here for it. I mean, that's
He's
what
not
happens.
wrong,
Like,
bro.
when you're a team that's been winning for basically what, a decade or whatever, at some point it just kind of sometimes it just kind of ends, right? Like we don't always think about it, but like the Chicago Bulls won the championship in 1998, right? And then it just ends, right?
Yep.
Everything falls apart. Guys don't want to be there anymore, and then Jordan retires, right? Steph or not Steph, Scottie Pippen goes to Houston or Portland or wherever it
Mhm.
was. And it's just like that's just what happens, right? The Detroit Pistons, right? They won the title in 2004, make the finals again in 2005, and lose in seven, and then have a few more years, and then they're just done, right?
Yeah.
Like the Spurs, right? Had the 5 titles over 15, 16, however many years or whatever, right? Then they win the finals in 2014, have a few more competitive runs, and then it's just done. Like
It's a
sometimes
cycle,
that's just
though.
what happens.
Like
It's just
everybody's going to come around at some point. It's just, you got to wait for it. But yeah, I think, they're at the end of the line, this group that is. And yeah, the game was horrible. A lot of forced shots from the Warriors. And we haven't really talked about the Kings, I think, in giving them the respect that they deserve. Because I know we've kind of been labeled as Kings haters, we continuously sleep on them. And I think Keegan Murray kind of woke us up tonight. And I think that was kind of the thing that we had always talked about with the Kings. We like the construction of the roster. It's just they need that third guy to be there at all times. If Keegan Murray could be that third guy, then I think we would talk about them in a different vein. The problem is, he's more of a 15 points per game scorer than a 32, So that's the issue. And you're not going to get that from him every night. This was a lot of, just having the hot hand, but also it helps when the entire team is the hot hand and you're doing magical things on defense. You're shutting down everybody. And also, shout out to the Kings fans because I'm sure they were getting in the Warriors' heads because that's a hostile environment.
Yeah, because I was watching, because obviously, we watch, videos and whatnot, and
Yeah.
I was kind of looking at some of like the Kings, podcasts, right? Kind of seeing like, how, the people covering them, felt about the matchup, right?
Mhm.
Some of them thought that they could win, right? But you just never knew, right? And then obviously in the comments, like there's a lot of fans in the comments that are kind of worried, like you said, like they were, because they knew and understood that last year it didn't go their way, right? It was still a more competitive series than I think most people expected. It wasn't like they got swept; they lost in 7.
Sure.
But at the same time, right? You're the 3 seed, they're the 6 seed, they're the veteran team that's done it before, and you lost, right? But this time around, things flipped, right? But it's a 1 game. It's not a 7-game scenario. It's 1 game. You're in Sacramento, and pretty much everything that you needed to happen happened. You got really good performances out of basically everybody in the starting 5 on both ends of the floor. You even got a good Sabonis game, right? And I think the other thing you got to remember is that, like, in last year's postseason, we kind of forget about it, right? But Sabonis, for most of the season, right, he had the hand issue where he
Yep.
was, had the wrap or whatever around it, couldn't
Mhm.
really hit jump shots. I mean, didn't really hit jump shots really in this game, but it's still, he was still more effective
Sure.
offensively than he was before. And then De'Aaron Fox by the end of that series, right? I think he had some type of hand or wrist.
It was
or
a finger thing. Finger.
Yeah, or whatever it was. Yeah, it
Mhm.
was like fractured. So he was trying to play through it, but it, that happens, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, that was at the end of the series when you really didn't know who was going to win. We thought the Warriors were going to win, but you just never knew, right? But this time around, they basically slayed the beast. And we'll see what happens if they can, win this 8-9 matchup against the Pelicans. Kind of depends, I think, on if Zion plays and if he's relatively close to 100%.
Sure.
If he's not, I think that's probably going to swing it towards the Kings. The Pelicans still have other talented players where they could still win if they get hot from three. Um, but you just never know. Like that's the tough part. So because the play-in is one game. That's
Yeah.
that's really the issue. That like
That's the magical
um
part, though.
yeah, it's kind of funny, right? Where you hear, like say like LeBron and Draymond, right? I think LeBron a while ago, right? He mentioned, whoever came up with the play-in should be fired, right? Because
Hmm.
he doesn't like the fact that it's like, hey, we're the 7-8 seed. Why do we have to play an extra game? We should just be in the playoffs.
Sure.
Um, because I saw people on the internet saying that he's benefited from the plan, and I just don't really think that that's the case because they weren't
Really?
9-10. No, yeah, because they were 7-8. They were never 9-10. If there was no
Sure.
play-in, they would just be in the playoffs.
Sure.
They
That
would
that
not,
that is a valid point. Yeah.
and actually, it hurt them this time around because if there was no play-in, they'd be 8 and they'd be playing OKC. They wouldn't even be playing the
True.
Nuggets.
That is true.
So
Yeah. So I guess
yeah,
that's just ignorance of people online and not
right.
knowing like
So
the truth.
and then for Draymond, he said, "I love it and I hate it," which I completely understand as well because I think in 2021 they were the 8th seed and they lost 2 playing games in kind of similar ways where they were both competitive. They had the lead for a while and then lost it at the end and they went from being 8 to being out of the playoffs. So
That
of
was the
course
one where
you
they played
hated
against
that.
Memphis, right?
Yeah, they
Okay.
lost to the Lakers in that first game with the stupid LeBron 3 where he
Yeah.
was, where he couldn't even see or whatever.
Yeah.
And then they lost to the Grizzlies in a game that I think most people did not expect, right?
Right.
Because they had that regular season matchup before, like a week before, where they beat them. And then they lost, and then they were out of the playoffs. And then this time around, you have to love it if you're Golden State because you were 10, and if there was no play-in, you wouldn't even be here. So but again, I like the play-in. Like
Me too.
obviously, like as a Laker fan, I hate the fact that we have to be in it, but I like it. Like because these games have been insane. Obviously, the second one was kind of not that great, but just in general, like every Laker playing game has basically been down to the wire, right? Like the Laker Warriors one was down to the wire. The last one last year between them and the Wolves was down to the wire. And then this one was down to the wire. So I mean,
Yeah.
I love the play-in. It's just like, it's just kind of a matter of I wonder, if we're gonna the only thing I might change is I just don't like the 7 seed being in there. I just think like if you're
Hmm.
7, I just don't think you should be in there at all because I think it's kind of just like unfair that like you're 7 and then you lose 2 games and then you're just done. Like
True.
I
I
think
guess. Yeah.
I think or and then I kind of also wonder there's been talk about, because the Bulls and Hawks, we'll get to the East in a minute. There's been lots of talks about the fact that, they're so far behind in terms of record compared to the Sixers and the Heat. And so, like, should there be a cutoff point where if you're too far behind, should you just not even be in it? What do you think of that?
That would be intriguing. I think
So
it
it's like,
could work, but it also couldn't at the same time. Like I get it. I like it kind of like the way it is. I think it adds some sort of underdog mentality, underdog value that I think that it wouldn't have if there was a cutoff point. Like you kind of feel awkward about it. I think if like it was more cookie cutter, I kind of like it being a little bit unorganized, and a little bit more up in the air. I think it reminds me more of like the NFL wild card where it's like, you lose, you're done. But, obviously some teams have a second chance like the Pelicans. But, I think from a fan perspective, the play-in is great. But I do understand like the frustration. And I think that's what Draymond was talking about. Like as a player,
right,
it's god awful because it's like, why are we doing this?
right. So what do you think the Warriors should do at this point?
Hmm.
Do you just kind of run it back and just ride it out into the sunset? Because I just don't necessarily know like what I just don't necessarily know if there's an obvious move. I guess in theory you could be like, let's take Chris Paul's expiring and like flip it for something.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you would get, but like, what is that? Because I think you probably need like a higher level co-star, like
Hmm.
some type of higher level offensive player to kind of play alongside Steph. Maybe
Yeah.
Kaminga gets to that point, but I think it's going to probably take a minute.
Too long.
Where I think his timeline just doesn't really match up with the veteran guys. I'm glad they didn't trade him because I think the way he played, kind of helped them.
Hmm.
Obviously during the latter, from December onwards. But either way, like I don't really know what the answer is because it's just like I think you almost kind of have to bring back Clay. I mean, just because what's the alternative? I guess you could let him walk and then you don't have as expensive of a roster, but you can't really replace him. Unless you're just like, let's just elevate one of the other guards on our roster. Maybe we're just like, let's make Moses Moody the starting 2 guard and just play him more or something like that. Or, I don't know. Like maybe that's the answer. What do you do with Wiggins? I don't know. I mean, he was
Yeah.
playing better towards the latter part of the season, but I just don't think he's the same guy that he was the title year. And I kind of wonder, like, at a certain point, like, is his contract maybe a negative contract now?
Hmm.
I don't know. Obviously you're gonna have to decide whether or not you extend Kaminga and Moody or just wait until the offseason. I don't know. Like I just don't know if there's an obvious move. Or maybe they're like, let's, re-sign Chris Paul on like a cheaper deal because I think his contract is non-guaranteed, so you could just waive him and re-sign him. Maybe they like him as a backup point guard.
Hmm.
I don't know. Like I get that he's helped the younger players, like, so I'm not saying he was bad, but like I don't know. Like I just don't really feel like that move really made much of a difference for them.
No, it made no visible impact, and I think that's the problem. I would probably look to like move Chris Paul. That would be the number one thing. Then at that point, I mean, you're kind of stuck with the core. I think you're stuck with Curry. You're stuck with Draymond Green. You're stuck with Clay, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, considering at least Curry, is one of those elite players, where, he's going to give you all he's got every night, night in, night out. You're still going to make a ton of money. Now, are you going to, make a ton of postseason runs? Who knows? But I think you need to start by looking at Wiggins and probably Chris Paul. Those are probably the two guys that I think are under the microscope on the hot seat for sure. And it's like, they might not be on the roster next season.
Yeah.
And that would be, I think, where I would start.
Yeah, Jason Temp, he put out a post
Mm-hmm.
about Steph's last 25 games of the regular season. 23 points a game, 4.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 42 from the field, 37.5 from three.
Mm-hmm.
Some people wonder, like, maybe he's got some type of injury that is bugging him. I don't know. I mean,
True.
like, I feel like that tends to be mentioned a lot, like when guys just have a bad game.
Yeah.
Like, because I remember, like, Chris Paul, a lot of times, like, you always hear of, like, oh, he had this injury that he was playing through, like,
Right.
after they get eliminated, but you don't hear about it while they're playing.
But
I mean,
nobody's
it's
ever 100% though at this point in the season. So
right. But I think it's kind of just highlighting that, like, I think he was kind of running out of gas during this latter part of the season. And I think
Absolutely.
it still goes back to that you don't really have another reliable offensive second option. And again, I think also he's probably also at a point kind of like LeBron, sort of, where it's like he's still like, a top tier ish player, but not necessarily every night.
Yeah.
Like I think I've seen like just more, not as good games from him recently. And maybe that's unfair, but I just think, in general, that's just kind of what happens. And
It's too much to
that's where
ask.
yeah, exactly. And that's where, you want like another co-star, right? Because like we saw him win a title a couple seasons ago, right? Where, there wasn't really like another equal on the roster, but there were a lot of guys that played well, right? Like Andrew
Yeah.
Wiggins, Jordan Poole, obviously. Clay was still fine, right? And other players as well, right? But like it just seems like everything's just kind of just dropped off precipitously. So I just don't really know what the answer is. And it may just be like we're just gonna ride it out. Maybe
That's what
we
they're
don't
gonna
win
do.
again. But yeah, that's what I think is probably gonna
I
happen.
don't think Curry's ever going to win a ring on the Warriors ever again. But on the bright side, you do have a couple of young guys that look good. I think you should trade the guys that I was talking about in Chris Paul and Wiggins maybe for some potential picks. I don't know, because you need to start looking at the future, but just kind of thugging it out, with what you have right now, because there's not a lot of flexibility, like you were saying.
right. And I do think, whiffing on a couple of draft picks, I think also kind of hurt, right? Like the Wiseman one hurts because that was the number 2 pick.
Mm-hmm.
And, of the top 3 guys, he was the worst one.
100%.
By a significant margin, right?
Yeah.
And then Kaminga now is at a point where like you don't feel bad about that pick, where it's like it doesn't seem like a miss. It just seems like it's probably going to take him some time to
Yeah,
get
he's
to
raw.
where whatever his ceiling is, because like you said, he's young. And then the Moody one, like Moody is a good player,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I feel like there were a couple of guys after him that were a little better, right? Like
100%.
Trey Murphy. And I think Şengün was after him as well. We
Mhm.
talked about this before, where again, Moody's not even a bad player. It's just
Mhm.
like it just seems like sometimes there's nights where he just doesn't really play, and then
They
there's
were
other
going
nights
for
where he
fit
plays.
when they drafted him,
Yeah. Like tonight, he played a lot because they didn't really have any other options. But then there's been other games, like there was the regular season game against the Kings where Malik Monk hit the game winner. Was on a heater at the start of the 4th, and then just doesn't play again. They just put Clay back in there. He stinks it up, and then you're just like, what's the point of this? So I don't know, but it's tough because again, you're kind of trying this balancing act of, I think it goes back to the two timelines decision, and it just didn't work out. And that's the tough part because it's not like every young player that they got was bad. The rookies they drafted this year were, I think, way better than I think you could have hoped for.
Absolutely.
Um, maybe their ceilings are lower than maybe some others, but their floors are pretty high. Obviously, they weren't great in this game, but again, this was a game where I think you needed your stars to kind of come through, and basically none of them did. Like they all pretty much got outplayed at their position, right? Like De'Aaron Fox pretty much, I think kind of was sort of even with Steph, which is
Agreed.
not really good.
Yeah.
If you're trying to win. And then obviously, right, Keon Ellis outplayed Clay. Keegan Murray, yeah, and Harrison Barnes definitely outplayed Wiggins and Draymond. And then,
100%.
Sabonis outplayed the bigs for the Warriors. So if all five of your starters outplay the other team starters, you have no chance.
Yeah, it's just a wild and sad way to go out, I think, for the Warriors. Definitely not the way that they wanted to end the season. Definitely on this kind of note.
Yeah.
But I guess we should probably preview Sacramento versus New Orleans a little bit. I don't think there's too much to say. If you want me to be frank, I know we continue to sleep on the Kings. I'm picking New Orleans. I think I'm going to pick them whether Zion is healthy or not. I think I'm expecting Brandon Ingram to kind of have a bounce back game, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Kings really do obliterate them, just like how they did with the Warriors if they don't have Zion. But if we're going best case scenario and Zion is there, I'm going to take the Pelicans. I think they're going to bounce back. They're the better team.
If Zion is healthy, I think they'll win.
Mm-hmm.
If he's not, it may be tough. I guess the question is Sacramento going to have back-to-back playing performances like that? Because I think you're going to need another game like that if you want to beat New Orleans. Because they have some more talented players on their roster than I think on this Golden State roster. Like there are some guys that are coming off the bench for New Orleans that are better than some of Golden State's stars.
100%.
Like Valanciunas, I think is just a better big man than Trace Jackson Davis or
100%.
even Cavani. Like I know he wasn't great in either of the Laker games, but that's AD you're going against. Whereas Valanciunas will be going against Sabonis.
Mm-hmm.
Who again is good, right? Really good. But he's not AD.
You're right.
Defensively at least.
Right.
And then obviously again like Trey Murphy, if he pops off, basically like if the guys that played poorly today have a much better game against the Kings and maybe you get some positive regression, that's where I think you have a chance. But I think the big factor is I think you need Zion. If he doesn't play, I think it's going to be a lot more difficult for New Orleans to win. And they've also just not been great at home. But you also have a hard time believing that they're going to drop 3 straight home games.
I don't think they will. That's why I think back against the wall, I'm picking them.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see.
It's not going to be easy though. I think it's going to be a dogfight.
Right, because it really just kind of comes down to, can the Kings replicate that performance again, and can the Pelicans, get a better performance out of some of the other role guys? Because if you have a better version of Ingram and McCollum, you don't have to have Zion score 40.
Facts.
He basically was like almost a one-man wrecking crew out there. But again, if his hamstring is bugging him, and that's the tough part, because half of my predictions for some of these series have pretty much been cooked by some of these injury reports. So, if we're moving to the East, right, we got a couple of playing games, I guess, it's 1:40 in the morning now,
Mm-hmm.
but next evening or whatever, you got Miami and Philly, right, in Philadelphia, and you got Chicago, Atlanta. I think we already said we both think that the Sixers will win against the Heat, and we think that the Bulls will beat the Hawks. I think those playing matchups are not really quite as interesting.
100%.
Mainly the 9-10 one. Like I don't really care about Chicago or Atlanta.
It's not entertaining. They're both bad teams at this point.
But obviously there is an importance level for the 7-8 because whoever wins will play the Knicks, and whoever loses, assuming they win the 8-9 matchup, will play the Celtics. And again, we know that the Heat have kind of had the Celtics number, somewhat at times. Right, I think the Celtics beat them obviously 2 seasons ago, right? But the Heat, beat them last season, and then obviously I think 2 seasons or however many seasons before when they played them in the finals.
Mm-hmm.
The first time around. So we'll see. But this Heat team doesn't seem like it's at quite as good.
Mm-hmm.
Rozier's going to be out, so I think that's a loss. Thank you. So I think that's a loss for Miami. Because you're going to need your Miami guards, to kind of match what Tyrese Maxey can give you. And then you're going to need a really good game from Butler, right? Duncan Robinson has been out. Maybe he'll show up. I just don't know. I don't know what version of the Heat I'm going to get because they just haven't been that great. I know they closed the season out 7-3, but I just can't. It's hard for me to really like tell whether or not this Heat team is actually good or not. Like
Right.
some days where I just think maybe they're just not good, and then there's other days where I'm like, they've had so many they've had such bad luck in terms of injuries, so maybe, maybe they might be good. According to Xander, Katie thinks they're garbage. I don't know. It's so
They're
hard to tell.
wishy-washy. They're an odd team. They're inconsistent.
It,
It's
and
hard to
like
tell when they've been hurt a lot, and then
right.
also Jimmy and Bam haven't played up to par either.
Right, and I saw this chart. I found this chart of information earlier today where they had like this bar graph, or not bar graph, but like just a graph of total player games lost due to either injury, rest, personal reasons, or suspension, and the Heat were sixth. Right, they were sixth on the list in terms of like the most games lost.
Okay.
Due to those four factors, which kind of goes to show, right, like that. Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of games where like their main guys have played because there
Right.
were a lot of games where Hero was out. There were a lot of games where Jimmy Butler was out. There were even games where Rozier's out, right? He's missed the last few games and he's going to miss this play-in game.
Right.
The number one team by far was the Grizzlies, which was nuts, as we already know, right? I think they literally are the most injured team in NBA history. I think that's an actual record, right? Blazers were 2, Hornets were 3. So all the horrible teams were the top 3. And then the Hawks, the Cavs, the Heat, then the Lakers, the Nets, the Bulls, and the Rockets, right? So that's the list. But I don't know. I just feel like Philly, if Embiid is okay, they're just probably better,
Yeah.
right? But at the same time, we saw Embiid get hurt in one of those last couple of games. He did come back. I just don't know. Like that's kind of the issue. And like, we know that the Cavs ducked that 2 seed because they didn't want to play Philly in the first round. But it's like, do I trust Embiid to stay healthy again for a playoff run? Maybe, but a lot of history in the past postseasons kind of tells us no. And then even in the playoffs, how effective is he going to be? Because he's not been as effective in the postseason as he's been in the regular season. I think an advantage this year is that you do have a better coach, Nick Nurse, and I think you have a roster that makes more sense around him. I just think Tyrese Maxey is a better fit than James Harden.
Yeah.
And then you have some other guys, especially on the wings, that I think that could be more helpful. In a one-game scenario, obviously anything can happen, but Philly's been really good at home. Assuming Embiid is okay, I think Philly should win that one, and then they'll play the Knicks.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly how it's going to go. As long as he's pretty much there, and does his job, I think they're golden. They're a go. We'll probably see them as a 7 seed, and they'll be playing New York, like you said. It's just what does Miami win? Their second game. That's what I would be kind of concerned about. I guess they do. I'm gonna probably assume that they would, and then we're gonna get Miami Boston in the first round again. I don't really think Miami is the type of team to drop back-to-back playing games. I don't think that would happen, but it could. And then like you said, the Bulls Hawks one. I mean, like I think we both pick Bulls, but I don't think that has really any ramifications on anything pretty much outside of if Miami potentially goes.
Right, yeah, so it's just the East is just such a different, it's just such a different league than the Western Conference, right?
Especially at the bottom.
Again, right, yeah, the 9 and 10 seeds are way below 500 in the East, but then the 9 and 10 seeds in the West are well above 500. So that just kind of goes to show. And again, when you get to play, teams like Detroit or Charlotte or Washington or whomever, like 3-4 times over the course of a season, like that helps, right? You basically get, 12 extra wins basically added to your record. And it's not like there aren't bad teams in the West, but you got to go way, way, way down, to find. And even like the Spurs, right, whose record is awful, they have Wembanyama, and we saw him, basically by himself kind of, knock out some other teams the last, stretch of the season.
He ruined some postseasons, bro.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that's literally what happened. So, I don't know. But the East playing stuff, I just think is just not quite as intriguing. I mean,
100%.
obviously we'll cover it when we get there. And then I guess some of the other, potential playoff matchup, like we already talked about Magic Cavs, right? Where I think we both think the Cavs are probably going to win that one.
I think I want to change my pick.
Oh, you think you're gonna change it to the Magic? Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna change it. I'm gonna change it to the Magic. On the next episode, I'll talk about it some more potentially. But yeah, I'm gonna change it to the Magic. I just have a feeling that their defense might carry hard.
Okay, and then the other one, I guess, Indiana, Milwaukee. I'm kind of feeling like I might need to change that pick because my pick was kind of predicated on Giannis being healthy, but it sounds like that he may not be ready
Yeah,
for the first game and probably won't play. And we still don't really have like a good timeline of maybe he'll be back for game 2, maybe he'll be back for we don't know. So if and that was kind of my thought process where I'm like, if he's not healthy, then I'm probably gonna have to lean Indiana because
sure.
I don't see Milwaukee being able to win 4 out of 7 times, and like 2 of those are without Giannis.
Agreed. It's gonna be the same thing as last year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like the Pacers defensively, like it's a lot different than like if they were playing Orlando, defensively. But still, at the same time, like you need your best player in order to win a playoff series. Like Indiana is still a good team, so
Right.
it's like if you're gonna beat a good team, you need your best player to play. And so it's like if he doesn't play, I'm probably gonna have to shift over. Um,
I
and
think
then
that's
in the
valid.
West, right? And then in the West, right? We still don't know the 1-8 matchup. Yeah, Xander Cade's questioning your logic for the Magic.
I don't want to get into it too much tonight, but I'm telling you, I feel like their defense is gonna be a hard matchup. I think for Garland. I think Garland, we're probably gonna see a bad series from him. And then also, I think their height and size is probably going to also bother Evan Mobley as well. I think a couple of the guys in Cleveland, I'm just going to say, I think they're going to get targeted a little bit more, and I think it might be a tougher matchup, an even tougher matchup than last year with the Knicks. I think we kind of saw what happened with Cleveland. Although, I do think Cleveland has a bunch of upside. I just think the Magic might be a little bit hungrier, but who knows?
Jonathan Isaac could also be an X factor because
Exactly.
he played a lot in that last regular season game against the Bucks, and if he's able to play more minutes, then that could potentially shift the series over. Because again, how the heck are you going to score on a team with that much size and length?
They're not going to be able to score in the paint. They're going to force them to shoot. Like, I don't know how they're going to get into the paint.
Yeah, it's
But
just
who knows?
the real question is can Orlando's offense be just good enough,
Yeah.
to match the deep? Because we know the defense is really good, but the offense has been bad. And so the real question is, can the offense just be average? If the offense is average, that's how you're going to be able to win.
Sure.
But if it's not, then that's probably going to be tough. And then, out west, we still don't know the 1-8 matchup because we have to see who wins between Kings and the Pelicans. Already talked about Lakers Nuggets.
Yep.
3-6, right? I think that's the Minnesota Timberwolves and Phoenix Suns. I think we're both right now leaning towards Phoenix.
Yeah, I'm going to
Seems
take Phoenix,
Minnesota just has not played very well against the Suns. Most of those games were blowouts. Obviously, the playoffs could be different. Maybe Edwards has a crazy game or crazy series or whatever. I don't know. It seems like the Suns have been playing, really well. Beal has looked really good, and I think that's kind of the big X factor.
Mhm.
If he plays, closer to what we expect him to be, that's where Phoenix looks significantly better because, again, we know he's good. It's just, can he be healthy? Can he be impactful? That's kind of the big thing there. And then what was I guess you can comment on that one before we get to the other.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Beal is the guy that I think, has a lot of eyes on him in terms of, he's got to show up because if he doesn't show up, it's going to be a waste of an acquisition. That's what people are going to label it. But most importantly, if he doesn't show up, probably going to be putting a lot of pressure on Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, which is probably the last thing you want to do with your top two guys. And Beal's job is to really relieve the pressure and make, everybody else's job easier. And then, it'll all trickle down. It'll be a trickle down effect. And I think that's kind of the thing that they've been lacking because wasn't a whole lot of the three of them together early on in the season. And then, they just really couldn't figure it out. But as of late, like you said, they've been on a roll. And I think that'll definitely carry over into the playoffs, knowing the guys and the personnel that they have. Whereas Minnesota, they're good, but are they proven? Not really. There's some question marks about Gobert where, even DeMarcus Cousins, probably not the best guy to bring the topic up, but he talked about it. He was like, how can a guy be Depoy if he gets subbed out sometimes in crunch time because, his coordination isn't the best sometimes. Or even like Towns where, you look at him, he's not that great of a defender. Also, question marks on his game, I think. And then Anthony Edwards is just so young a lot of question marks, but we do know that he has the raw superstar talent. It's just a matter of experience. How is that going to factor when you're playing Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and potentially Bradley Beal as well? So I don't know how it's going to fare, but I think Phoenix has got it.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Minnesota has been a team that, like, going into the season, I just was not quite as high on. Honestly, they really impressed me with how they've been this regular season. But I still just feel like ultimately, like, I think the offense is just going to be a problem in the postseason. And against a team like the Suns, you're going to have to find some ways to score. Like, you're not going to be able to just do it on the defensive end.
Right.
Obviously, it really comes down to, like, can the Minnesota players, outside of like Edwards and Towns, can they give them anything? Like, can McDaniels kind of give you some more offensive punch? Can Naz Reid off the bench? Can he give you some offensive punch? Maybe you can get another bench guy like Monte Morris, or maybe Kyle Anderson has like a couple of random, big offensive performances. I don't know. I don't see it. I could be wrong, but I don't know. This one smells like a Suns, upset, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think they're actually favored. So who knows?
Yeah, I think Minnesota is the of the top 3 seeds, the one that's got the worst situation.
Agreed.
Because you're going against a team that has owned you in the regular season. Probably it is going to carry over into the postseason, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And then 4-5, right? That's the Mavs and the Clippers. I think that one, I think the Mavs are slightly favored, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yep. You're correct.
We'll see what happens with that one. I think the biggest X factor right now is Kawhi's health. We don't know if Kawhi is going to play in the first game. I think right now, right, Ty Lue kind of hasn't really, given a definitive answer. Xander Cate said Ant-Man is going to pop off, but it won't mean anything, LOL. I think that's kind of the problem, is just like, even if he plays really well, is that going to be enough? Like, you still need more. You're not going to be able to have just him kind of go off for like 30 and then they still win. Because he could have, like you said, he could go off for like 35, 40 in a game and still lose because you just don't have enough offense around you.
Yep.
Or maybe he has like 30 points, but it's on like 35 shots or something insane like that. Like,
or he just has a bad game. Like, that wouldn't surprise me either.
Yeah, I just don't think he's ready to be able to make like a deep playoff run where like they can make the finals. I think like that's a lot to ask out of a guy where his first playoff, I know he made the playoffs, what was it, 2 seasons ago, but he was like, what, in year 2?
Yeah.
And then obviously year 3, year 4, he's taking a leap each year, but I think you're going to have to probably wait a couple more seasons, for them to put, together a roster where it's like, this is his team, this roster is completely built alongside of him. It's not that he kind of just came in, kind of had to kind of make some stuff.
Because they're still in the Towns era, pretty much, Like, it's a weird situation, like you were saying, Like, I think the team needs to look different for him to kind of strive in the postseason.
And then back to the Clippers Mavs.
Yeah, sure.
If Kawhi is healthy, I mean, you would think that they should be able to beat the Mavs because they have more talent. It's just a matter of, it's like the thing with Giannis or the thing with Zion or whatever, right? If those guys aren't healthy, it's going to be a lot tougher for them to be able to win because you need your best player in order to win a playoff series against a quality team. So I don't know. Like, I think it's somewhat close to 50-50, but if Kawhi isn't healthy, you almost kind of have to lean Dallas as of right now. Obviously, the Clippers have home court. I mean, their home court advantage in the Crypto.com arena is not quite the same as the Lakers, but, I'm sure they'd be excited for playoff basketball. But I don't know. Like, I just, not knowing whether or not Kawhi can really play, I don't know. Start Westbrook. I beg of you, slow down Kai.
That's interesting. I like it, but I don't at the same time.
I think, in that matchup, you're right in the sense of like, you have to find a way to slow down Kyrie. I would think you would almost just be like, let's have one of Kawhi guard Luka, one of Kawhi or Paul George guard Luka, and then have the other guard Kyrie. Because in the starting 5, there's not like a third guy that's like, a go-to offensive player. I mean, you have PJ Washington, but he's not like a creator, in the way that Luka and Kyrie are. So I would think the whole point of having Kawhi and Paul George is you want one of them to guard one and the other one guard the other. Obviously, they're not going to guard those guys the entire game. They're going to switch, right? They're going to have mismatches and whatnot. But if Kawhi's healthy, right, you would think he would probably take on Luca, and then they probably put Paul George on like Kyrie or whatever. Maybe they put Terrence Mann on Kyrie. I mean, that's the other factor. I mean, because he's the other guy. He's the one guy in the starting five that you don't really look to, for creation or anything. Harden is not going to show up. That's the other factor as
Mm.
well. Because I think part of what's kind of been the Clippers' slide. I know they closed the season on a good note, but that stretch right after the All Star break where they weren't playing quite as well and just didn't look like the championship caliber team that they were. Part of that was Harden was not playing as well. I know like
Yeah.
Kawhi kind of had a dip in his stats, but he was still like good. But Harden went from like really good to just bad. And like obviously, unlike Kawhi, like if Harden's not giving you a good offensive game, I don't think he's gonna have a great game because he's not really like he's not like a great defender, right? So like if he's not giving you like you know I don't know 15 and 10 or like 18 and 10, right? Because that's kind of what you're hoping for from Harden is like a solid offensive game, but also some really good passing and playmaking because he's their point guard. If you're not
It's got to
getting
be
that, if you're
efficient
not
too.
yeah. But if you're not getting that, if you're getting a inefficient version of him, that's not good because
Right.
he's not going to give you much defensively.
No.
And that's really, I think, part of it because I think Harden, when he plays well, that's generally when the Clippers look a lot better because he can help them create all of these really good looks. Because that stretch where they looked like the best team in the NBA, a lot of that was because obviously they were defending well, but they also knew how to create quality looks almost every time down the floor. I saw a lot of their games, and it was just amazing just to see what they were able to do um, on that end of the floor,
Xander
right?
Cade said,
But
"I thought we were going to go to the chip." I think he's talking about like that stretch where they looked like the best team in the league.
yeah, but I think Harden not playing as well, and then Kawhi not being quite as healthy, I think that's kind of hurt. Because those are really, because Kawhi's your best player, so you need him to be like a top 5-ish type player, anyways.
Mhm.
And then you still need Harden to be good because you traded for him because you wanted an upgrade at the point guard spot that you didn't have before, right? Because Westbrook started last year, and he's fine. Obviously, he still can play, but you know that there are limitations, for him in a playoff environment, just because of the fact that you don't necessarily know, you know, what perimeter shooting are you going to get from him, right? Like there are games where he'll hit outside shots, but that's not always consistent. You know how teams are going to guard that. But I think you got to find a way to at least slow down Kyrie because I think Luca, you almost might have to say might be a lost cause. But I think you
Not
can't
stopping
have
him.
but I think you can't have both of them show up. If both of them play great, you're probably going to lose because all they just need then is just some of the other guys around them to hit a handful of shots, and then they're good, right? Because that's kind of how they've been winning for the most part. Where it's Luca and Kyrie, other guys doing their thing on both ends of the floor, and that's really the formula for them, right? That's why they've been so good, to close out, the season, post All Star break. Um, I don't know, but if Kawhi's not healthy, it's really gonna be hard for me to pick the Clippers. Like that's
Yeah.
really the big thing. Like because Harden, yeah, you might almost at this point just expect Harden to just kind of just find a way to just kind of screw it up. Because that just seems like what tends to happen come playoff time for him, anyways. You would hope that in a role where he's, not quite as relied upon, that he would just that you don't have to have like a vintage Harden performance like you did, like, with those other teams. You just can't have him be bad. And I think like if he's bad, you hope like, okay, Kawhi should play really well. Paul George should be good. You just need like I think you need two of those three guys. But
Yeah.
Harden cannot be bad, right? He could be okay, but he can't be bad. If your point guard is bad, it's gonna be really hard, to kind of get those offensive looks because then you're gonna default back to the Kawhi and Paul George one-on-one ISO show. And if and
That
that
didn't
didn't get
work.
them any. Yeah, it didn't work. That was why
Never
they got
has,
Harden.
never will.
So yeah, I mean, we'll see. But
Yeah.
right now, if Kawhi's not 100% or close to it, I don't know.
Yeah. Call it a GG, dude.
So but that's the rough part is that like over the course of a season, you got to be healthy. You got to have things go your way. And it's rough because we saw the stretch where they look so good, and it's
Yeah.
kind of hard for me to believe that it's just gone. Like I can't say that they have no chance. Like I said, I just need to see Kawhi healthy. If he's healthy, I think you give him a good shot, but who knows? Like
Yeah.
we just never know with him. That's kind of the big problem is that like, and again, obviously, he doesn't have to tell us everything obviously cuz we're just fans. But
Mhm.
at the same time, like not knowing physically what's going on, like that's the issue. Claw will be back. You better hope so. I mean, that's
You better say
that's
that
really the
prayer,
big
man.
Yeah, I mean that's the big thing. If he's back and he's close to 100%, then I think you have a good shot. Because then you should at least say, okay, they have Luca, but we do have Kawhi, who's still really good, right? And when he's at his best, he can pretty much kind of compete with anybody. We saw it last year before he got hurt. But
Yeah.
is he going to be able to sustain a full playoff run? I mean, he was healthy for most of this year, but then obviously the last couple of weeks he hasn't really played. So I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I think they're just gonna rest him. The rest will do him some good. They're gonna figure it out. I think. I mean, like Xander said, I think Kawhi will be back. And if he is, that makes the series 10 times more entertaining. And yeah, it'll be good for both parties in terms of fans, players, the NBA as a whole. So, but yeah, I think that just about covers like the playoffs, a little bit of a playoff preview. We'll be getting into more stuff in the next episode. And I think when is the East playoffs or East play-in, excuse me, is that tomorrow? Today?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Wednesday.
So we'll be going live again Wednesday night after after both games are finished. And yeah, once again, thank you for everybody who showed up, showed out. Thank you, Xander Cade, for interacting, man. We always love to have you around. You always make the live streams pretty fun. And also, it's really funny that you're a Clippers fan because, you guys are really good this year. But yeah, once again, thank you guys for the support. If you're new, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates. We post, pretty frequently on there, just shorts of our normal episodes. And yeah, once again, like I said, we'll be live on Wednesday night. So yeah, I think we're going to call it because we have hit that hour mark. We're a little bit over an hour, about an hour and 20, longer than we go normally, but great conversations, great standings. And I think, the playoffs will be one for the ages. So once again, thank you everybody for coming through the live stream.